Boy, oh boy, I feel like I've watched this movie before, but here we are again. Today we're talking about Highguard, Wildlife Entertainment's very first release. It has come out, and it has come out with quite a rocky release, to say the very least. So it's rather interesting. Let's dive into it. Highguard is a free-to-play PvP raid shooter, is how the developers are describing this game. And then, like I said, it was made by Wildlife Entertainment. Wildlife Entertainment is comprised of a lot of members from Respawn that have fractured off and created this new studio. Respawn, obviously very well known for Titanfall, Titanfall 2, two games I absolutely loved. I thought those were really innovative at the time, mixing PvE and PvP together in a very fun multiplayer experience. And of course, Respawn later went on to make Apex Legends, which, no matter what you think about it, that game has been wildly successful, if not slowly trending down in the last few years. But nonetheless, that game does very, very well for itself. So, a little bit of a prestigious repertoire going over to create this new studio, and they give us Highguard. So, back to the original question, what is Highguard? Well, there's not really a way to explain this game unless I walk you through an entire match, so that's what we're going to do here. You start the game and you select your champion. So it is a hero shooter right off the bat. That makes me cringe just saying out loud. I definitely am tired of hero shooters. Majority of them are not done well, but we're not going to just give up hope in the first 10 seconds. So you pick your champion. After you select your champion, you're then given a choice of 4 base layouts. So you choose your base layout. There's only 4, I believe, at launch at this point that you can choose from, but you pick one, then you go into the match. Now, Highguard is a 3v3 shooter. So there's 3 members on your, 2 other people on your team and 3 members on the opposing team. And as you launch into the game, you're immediately starting off by reinforcing the walls around your objectives that are in your base. Your base is basically laid out with a bomb site, a B bomb site, and then a centralized bomb site as well. And during this period, you're replacing plaster walls with iron walls that are harder to breach. We'll come back to this, but once you get your base reinforced, you basically hop on your horse and you head to the edge of your base's dome. After a certain amount of time, the dome will lift and you're able to then go out and explore the map, the actual map itself. And this is where the game kind of turns into a little bit of a extraction shooter, sort of a BR hybrid type of thing. But during this phase, you're in a gearing phase. So you're running around, opening chests, upgrading your weapons, and getting more wall reinforcements, getting more, weapons and things like that. Upgrading your armor, getting helmets, all the traditional loot shit that you would have to do in a game of this nature. And as you're collecting this loot, a sword icon spawns on the map, and this is the shield breaker. So the shield breaker then, after 2-3 minutes or something like that, starts to form. Once it starts to form, it takes a minute. And your objective as your team is to move towards the shield breaker, fight at the shield breaker to obtain control of the shield breaker. Once you obtain the shield breaker, your goal then is to drive the shield breaker from where it spawned to the enemy base. Insert the shield breaker into the base, which spawns a massive siege tower that bashes into the enemy dome. After 3 bashes, it busts open, which allows your team to then enter the enemy base. Once you get into the enemy base, it's then your job to destroy the base from the inside. And if you recall the initial conversation about reinforcing our base, the enemy base is laid out the same way. You have an A bomb site, a B bomb site, and a centralized bomb site. So once you break in, you go to the bomb site, you plant a bomb, you wait 45 seconds if it's an A site or a B site for the bomb to detonate and explode. So you kind of sit in this defensive position while you're waiting for the bomb to go off, protecting it. If it blows up, it deals damage to the enemy's health bar at the top of the screen. Each team starts with 100 health points. Breaching into the wall is 30 damage. Taking out a bomb site is 35 damage. The A or the B bomb site, that is. But the centralized bomb site in the map is the end of the game site, right? So if let's just say you break in and you go straight for the middle site on the map and you plant a bomb there, that's a 60-second timer, so it's a little bit longer, but if that bomb site explodes, the game is over immediately, so the game can be done literally in about 10 minutes if you really are able to capitalize and get that main bomb site. But that is the flow of a match of Highguard. So it goes from a base defense thing to kind of an extraction shooter battle royale loot phase to a King of the Hill mode where you're fighting for the shield breaker to a dead out sprint, so back kind of to the extraction shooter flow into the open map. Once you then break into the enemy base, it becomes a plant the bomb mode, and let's just say, for example, you're unable to get any bombs to blow. The raid will inevitably end, and this will then launch you back to your base, and the cycle repeats itself. So worst case scenario, games can literally be won by a 30-point dome break, a reset, 30-point dome break, a reset, a 30-point dome break, a reset, and you can literally break the dome 3 times or 4 times to win the game if you're unable to blow up a bomb site. But at the end of the day, it is a very unique concept that I'm not super opposed of. I think the gameplay or the ideas here are relatively smart. It is a kind of an ever-evolving match, and it combines a lot of multiplayer modes into one big event, which I think is relatively creative. The matches being 3v3 is odd, in my opinion. That is a very strange choice. The actual map itself feels a little too big for 3v3 player matches. I would much rather have had these games be 5v5 as opposed to 3v3, just because there is so much space in between that it just feels a little strange. I don't know how chaotic it would be with 5v5. I'm sure this was internally tested, but it just feels a little slow with just the 3v3 format, in my opinion. I will say as well, the game is free to play, and they clearly did not have the budget they had for Titanfall, Titanfall 2, or Apex Legends here. It feels like a free-to-play shooter when the game is in your hands, in my opinion. It's very reminiscent of Combat Arms or whatever the new combat teams or whatever the new free-to-play shooter is that people are playing nowadays. It doesn't really feel all that satisfying. Shoot the weapons, so that's kind of another strike on the game. And then, of course, it being a hero shooter doesn't help things. Obviously, they needed to have some skills in this game to kind of balance out the combat and add some depth here. I would have much preferred it not to have that, and maybe just to have abilities be pickups out in the map as opposed to having to select a specific hero and going into the game that way. But that's not what we got here. The first 4 matches or so, I was not enjoying myself whatsoever. I was really confused as to what the fuck was happening. Once I finally learned the game a little bit more, I can say I have had some fun while playing the game. So it's not all bad. However, you got to get past the initial hurdle, which includes a 15-minute unskippable tutorial that you have to go through, and then some rough beginning matches to really get into the flow of the game. And even then, it still feels, unfortunately, rather cheap. So now you know what Highguard is. Let's dive into some of the controversies here. First and foremost, obviously, this is being brought up all over the internet, is the absolute drop in player base this game has had in its initial 2 days of release. It peaked at 98,000 concurrent players on Steam. Again, it's just Steam numbers, and it's dropped to about 9,000, which is a massive drop. Yes, I understand. I fucking hate talking about Steam charts, but that is massively impactful. However, this game was pretty much destined for this type of launch due to the trailer being shown at the Game Awards. People were very confused by the trailer, were very confused by the placement of the trailer, and rightfully so. However, it has come out that Wildlight Entertainment intended this game to be a shadow drop, very similar to Apex Legends. However, Jeff Keighley got early access to Highguard, loved the game, really enjoyed it, and wanted it at the Game Awards. So he insisted on allowing the ability to show off the game at the Game Awards, which put Wildlight in a very odd situation. Of course, if they gave a trailer to Jeff to show, they're going to get a lot more eyeballs on their game, which is only going to be a positive. However, you do run the consequences of basically overstepping your britches, or however you want to word that, where you know the game isn't as content dense or complete as other games in the market, and by getting this premiere trailer site, you're going to have people coming in that are going to be disappointed in what they receive at the end. And that is what's happening here to a massive degree. This game would have been much, much, much more successful as a shadow drop. I think that is without question. I think a lot of people had their expectations set way, way too high for this game coming out of that, and that's why we saw such a massive explosion of players on release day. And conversely, that's why we're seeing the player base level out at a much lower point. So that's just all around not great for Wildlight Entertainment, but they were in a very particular spot where I don't even know what decision I would make in that position. If they shadow dropped the game, the initial player base would have certainly been a lot smaller. There would have been a lot less coverage of the game right out of the gate, which would allow the developers time to actually make changes based on player feedback and things of that nature, as opposed to just launching this game out into the world with its current state and suffering with the consequences, and then just getting absolutely overwhelmingly dumped with criticism without the ability to actually work on the game to make it better. And that's unfortunately how these live service games are done. They usually start off in a very low point, and if the developers are true to their word and stick to their project, they're going to increase it over time, and this game did not have that opportunity because of that game trailer. So Jeff Keighley really fucked the direction of this game, and that is tragic. So that being said, what is my overall opinion on Highguard? Keep in mind, guys, I am not a competitive shooter player primarily any longer. I was 10, 15 years ago, but I've switched my focus to narratives games over the last few years. So this isn't really my main genre anymore, but I do think this game is fun. I think it is enjoyable for what it is. I would recommend giving the game a shot, sticking with the game, grind out those couple rough early matches, and really give the game a shot for yourself. I think this whole situation sucks for Wildlight Entertainment, and I do believe that this game will get better as time goes on, and I don't necessarily think it's in a bad spot where it currently is. If you're looking for something new as an FPS fan, I still recommend giving this game a shot. You might like it, but it's just one of those things where you kind of have to block out all the outside noise surrounding the game and find your own enjoyment. That's my opinion. You know, I really hope that this game does get the time it needs to work through its issues with the community around it without it getting concorded to death before that even happens. There's a lot of news flying around about this game, as we mentioned. I hope the development team does get its time to do what they need to do to work on it. I'm staying cautiously optimistic on this project. I would love to see it grow. Definitely needs some work, but I just think the situation is rather unfortunate for these guys. So other than that, what do you guys think of Highguard? Let me know down in the comments below, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Take care of yourselves. We'll see you later.